Imperial Leather, Race, Gender, and Sexuality in the Colonial Context, is a book written by McClintock and published in 1995. The book explores the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality within the context of colonialism. McClintock, a cultural historian and feminist scholar, examines how colonial powers used notions of race, gender, and sexuality to establish and maintain their dominance over colonized peoples and lands. The book delves into the ways in which imperial powers constructed and enforced identities, particularly focusing on the experiences of women and non-white individuals. McClintock's work provides a critical analysis of how power dynamics, cultural representations, and economic factors intertwine to shape the colonial world. Imperial Leather is often regarded as a significant contribution to post-colonial and feminist scholarship, shedding light on the complexities of colonial histories and their lasting impacts on contemporary society. Imperial Leather, Race, Gender, and Sexuality in the Colonial Context, by McClintock is a groundbreaking work that explores the intricate connections between colonialism, race, gender, and sexuality during the height of European imperialism. The book offers a comprehensive and nuanced analysis of how these intersecting factors shaped the colonial experience and continue to influence contemporary society. McClintock's book is organized into several chapters, each delving into different aspects of the colonial project and its effects. She examines how colonial powers utilized various strategies, including cultural representations, legal systems, and economic structures, to establish and maintain their dominance over colonized territories. One key focus of the book is the role of women within the colonial context. McClintock highlights how gender norms and ideologies were used to justify and perpetuate colonialism. She discusses how European women were positioned as civilizers and bearers of culture, often contributing to the colonial project in ways that reinforced imperial control. The book also emphasizes the ways in which racial hierarchies were constructed and reinforced. McClintock examines how racial ideologies influenced policies, social structures, and interactions between colonizers and colonized populations. She pays particular attention to the dehumanization and exploitation of indigenous and non-white peoples. Additionally, McClintock explores the complexities of sexuality within the colonial context. She discusses how the intersections of race and gender played a role in shaping sexual norms, behaviors, and representations. The book critically examines the exploitation and objectification of bodies in the colonial context and how these dynamics continue to impact contemporary discussions on sexuality. Imperial Leather challenges traditional historical narratives and offers a multidimensional perspective on the colonial project. By focusing on the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality, McClintock's work invites readers to critically rethink their understanding of colonialism and its enduring legacies. The book remains a seminal text in post-colonial studies, feminist theory, and critical race theory, contributing to ongoing discussions about power, identity, and resistance in a global context. Imagine a colonial setting in the 19th century where a European power has established control over a colonized territory in Africa. In this context, several dynamics outlined in the book could be observed. Gendered roles in colonialism. European women are often portrayed as being part of the civilizing mission. They are depicted as bringing culture, education, and morality to the colonized people. For instance, European women might establish schools to educate local women in European manners and customs, reinforcing the idea that the colonizers' way of life is superior. Racial hierarchies and exploitation. The colonial power enforces strict racial hierarchies, considering European identity as superior and local identities as inferior. This hierarchy justifies the exploitation of local labor and resources. For example, indigenous labor might be exploited for plantations or mining, and their cultural practices might be devalued or erased. Sexuality and control. Sexual dynamics are intertwined with colonial control. European men might exoticize and fetishize indigenous women, treating them as objects of desire. This objectification reinforces the colonial power's dominance. At the same time, local women might be portrayed as sexually dangerous, serving as a rationale for European men to control local populations more tightly. These examples demonstrate how gender, race, and sexuality intersect within the colonial context, reinforcing power dynamics and contributing to the overall system of control. Imperial Leather would analyze these dynamics in depth, revealing how they were employed to legitimize and perpetuate colonial dominance. The book would also likely delve into the resistance strategies employed by colonized populations to challenge and subvert these systems of oppression. Imagine a colonial scenario in British-ruled India during the 19th century. Gendered colonial roles. British women in India were often assigned roles within the colonial project that reinforced European superiority. They were encouraged to uphold Victorian ideals of womanhood, embodying morality, modesty, and cultural refinement. This was meant to contrast with the perceived, exotic, and uncivilized nature of Indian women. For example, British women might be involved in missionary work, educating Indian women about Western values and customs. Racial hierarchies and economic exploitation. The British colonial administration perpetuated racial hierarchies to justify their rule. They positioned themselves as racially superior and cast Indians as inferior. This racial ideology justified economic exploitation, as British administrators imposed heavy taxes on Indian farmers, forced them to grow cash crops for export, and extracted wealth from the colony to benefit the British Empire. Sexuality and control. The colonial discourse often depicted Indian women as objects of exotic allure, while simultaneously portraying Indian men as sexually threatening. This portrayal served to both objectify Indian women and rationalize British control over Indian society. For instance, the narrative of saving Indian women from supposed oppression was used to legitimize colonial intervention, such as banning certain cultural practices. Resistance and agency. Colonized populations didn't passively accept these dynamics. Local women played active roles in resisting colonial rule. They organized protests, participated in nationalist movements, and challenged gender norms to assert their agency. Additionally, colonial subjects developed their own counter-narratives to challenge racial hierarchies and colonial ideologies. In this example, Imperial leather would delve into these complex dynamics, examining how race, gender, and sexuality were interwoven into the colonial project. The book would discuss how these intersections of identity were employed to justify colonization, subjugate colonized peoples, and perpetuate the economic and social control of the colonial powers. At the same time, the book would highlight the ways in which individuals and communities resisted these systems, contesting the dominant narratives and asserting their own identities and agency in the face of colonial oppression. Imperial leather, race, gender, and sexuality in the colonial context, by McClintock explores a range of interconnected themes related to colonialism, gender, race, and sexuality. Some of the central themes in the book include colonial power and control. The book examines how colonial powers established and maintained dominance over colonized territories through various means, including economic exploitation, legal frameworks, cultural narratives, and military force. It explores the ways in which power dynamics were established and reinforced, often at the expense of local populations. Race and racial hierarchies. McClintock discusses the construction and reinforcement of racial hierarchies within the colonial context. She examines how these hierarchies were used to legitimize the dominance of European powers and to justify the subjugation and exploitation of indigenous and non-white populations. The book critically analyzes the impact of racial ideologies on colonial policies and interactions. Gender and femininity. The book delves into the roles and representations of women within the colonial project. It discusses how gender norms were employed to reinforce the power of colonial powers, particularly in positioning European women as bearers of culture and morality. McClintock examines how these gendered roles intersected with broader colonial objectives. Sexuality and objectification. The book explores the ways in which sexuality was intertwined with colonial dynamics. It discusses how colonial powers exploited and objectified bodies, particularly those of women, to further their agendas. The sexualization of indigenous women and the control of local sexuality are analyzed in the context of colonial control. Resistance and subversion. Imperial leather highlights the strategies of resistance employed by colonized populations. It explores how individuals and communities contested the dominant narratives, challenged colonial power structures, and asserted their own agency. The book examines the ways in which marginalized groups resisted both overt and subtle forms of oppression. Cultural representation and identity. The book discusses the construction of cultural representations within the colonial project. It examines how stereotypes and cultural narratives were created and circulated to reinforce colonial ideologies. The impact of these representations on the identities and self-perceptions of colonized populations is explored. Continued legacies and impact. McClintock also discusses the lasting impact of colonialism on contemporary society. She analyzes how the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality continue to shape global power dynamics, cultural representations, and social inequalities. Overall, Imperial Leather engages with these themes to provide a comprehensive analysis of how colonialism operated as a complex system of power and how the intersections of identity played a crucial role in shaping colonial histories and their ongoing legacies. Intersectionality and power dynamics. Imperial Leather underscores the significance of intersectionality, the interconnectedness of race, gender, and sexuality, in understanding the colonial project. It reveals how these factors were not isolated but deeply entwined. The book demonstrates that colonial power wasn't exerted uniformly, it varied based on the intersections of these identities. This analysis highlights the complexity of colonialism and its impact on different groups. Colonial narratives and identity construction. McClintock emphasizes the role of cultural narratives and representations in constructing and maintaining colonial power structures. Colonial powers disseminated specific narratives to justify their dominance and define the identities of both the colonizers and the colonized. This manipulation of narratives extended to gender and sexuality, perpetuating certain norms and stereotypes. Objectification and resistance. The book's examination of how sexuality was used to objectify and control marginalized populations underscores the importance of understanding how bodies were manipulated for the colonial project. However, McClintock also highlights that marginalized groups resisted these forms of objectification, often subverting colonial intentions. This reveals the resilience and agency of those subjected to colonial domination. Impact on modern society. The book's analysis of the enduring legacies of colonialism raises questions about how these historical power dynamics continue to affect contemporary society. The intersections of race, gender, and sexuality are still central to discussions of power, inequality, and social justice. Understanding these legacies is crucial for addressing present-day issues. Global and local perspectives. Imperial Leather acknowledges that the impacts of colonialism were both global and local. While colonial powers operated on a global scale, their effects were deeply felt in local communities. The book illustrates how people negotiated these impacts within their own contexts, sometimes challenging or subverting colonial intentions. Critique of historical narratives. The book offers a critique of traditional historical narratives that often overlook or simplify the complexities of colonialism. By analyzing the intersections of identity and power, McClintock challenges readers to engage with a more nuanced understanding of history and its effects. Academic and activist intersection. McClintock's work sits at the intersection of academic analysis and activism. By shedding light on the experiences of marginalized groups and critiquing power structures, the book contributes to both academic discourse and broader discussions about social justice, equality, and human rights. In summary, Imperial Leather provides a sophisticated analysis of how colonialism operated as a system of power, how identities intersected within that system, and how the legacies of colonialism continue to shape our world. The book's exploration of race, gender, and sexuality offers a comprehensive framework for understanding the complex dynamics of colonial history and its implications for contemporary society. Intersectionality and colonial power. Anne McClintock's examination of intersectionality emphasizes how different dimensions of identity, race, gender, and sexuality intersected to reinforce and shape colonial power dynamics. This approach challenges traditional historical narratives that often analyze these aspects in isolation. McClintock's exploration highlights the ways in which colonialism was a multifaceted system that impacted individuals and communities differently based on their intersecting identities. Gendered colonial roles. The book underscores the role of gender in the colonial project. By analyzing how European women were positioned as civilizers, and how indigenous women were portrayed as either exoticized or oppressed, McClintock demonstrates how gender norms were manipulated to legitimize colonial control. This analysis contributes to the broader understanding of how gender ideologies were used to reinforce power dynamics. Racial hierarchies and cultural representations. McClintock's discussion of racial hierarchies and cultural representations sheds light on how colonial powers constructed a sense of racial superiority. She examines how visual, literary, and cultural representations played a role in reinforcing these hierarchies. This analysis showcases the role of media and imagery in shaping public perceptions and justifying colonial domination. Sexuality is a tool of control. The book's exploration of sexuality as a tool of control highlights how the regulation of bodies and desires was central to the colonial project. McClintock's analysis reveals how the sexualization of certain bodies and the demonization of others contributed to the exercise of power. This examination demonstrates how the intersections of sexuality, race, and gender were utilized to maintain colonial dominance. Resistance and agency. Imperial leather places significant emphasis on the resistance strategies employed by colonized populations. By highlighting how individuals and communities contested dominant narratives and power structures, McClintock showcases the agency of those subjected to colonial rule. This analysis is a reminder that even in the face of oppression, there were active efforts to challenge and subvert the colonial project. Global impact and contemporary relevance. The book's consideration of the lasting impact of colonialism on contemporary society prompts readers to critically examine how historical power dynamics continue to influence the present. By connecting historical contexts with modern social issues, McClintock's work encourages readers to engage with ongoing conversations about social justice, inequality, and decolonization. Challenging dominant narratives. Imperial leather challenges traditional narratives of colonial history by offering a more complex and nuanced analysis. McClintock's examination of intersectionality challenges readers to move beyond simplified accounts and to engage with the intricate ways in which identity and power intersected within the colonial context. In conclusion, Imperial leather is a significant contribution to post-colonial and feminist scholarship. By critically examining the intersections of race, gender, and sexuality within the colonial project, the book provides a comprehensive framework for understanding the complexities of power, resistance, and identity. It invites readers to reconsider historical narratives, confront ongoing inequalities, and engage with the legacy of colonialism in the contemporary world. A critical appreciation of Imperial leather, race, gender, and sexuality in the colonial context by McClintock reveals its significance as a groundbreaking work within the realms of post-colonial studies, feminist theory, and critical race theory. Here's a deeper exploration of its critical aspects. Interdisciplinary approach. Imperial leather masterfully combines insights from multiple disciplines, including history, cultural studies, gender studies, and post-colonial theory. This interdisciplinary approach enriches the analysis by offering a multifaceted view of colonialism's impact on identities, power structures, and resistance. Intersectional lens. McClintock's use of intersectionality as a framework is a standout feature of the book. This approach allows for a more holistic understanding of how race, gender, and sexuality intersect to shape colonial dynamics. The focus on intersectionality challenges monodimensional analyses and captures the complexities of colonial power. Deconstruction of dominant narratives. The book's deconstruction of colonial narratives and representations unveils the constructed nature of historical accounts. By dissecting how colonial powers manipulated images and discourses, McClintock disrupts the prevailing colonial narrative and invites readers to critically question histories that perpetuate Eurocentric perspectives. Agency and resistance. Imperial leather stands out for its emphasis on the agency of colonized individuals and communities. It underscores how marginalized groups resisted, negotiated, and subverted colonial power structures. This focus on agency disrupts the notion of passive victimhood, showcasing the resilience and determination of those subjected to colonial oppression. Relevance to contemporary discussions. The book's examination of the lasting legacies of colonialism resonates strongly with contemporary discussions on global power dynamics, systemic racism, and social justice. McClintock's analysis enables readers to connect historical patterns of domination to ongoing struggles, encouraging critical engagement with present-day issues. Critical engagement with identity and power. McClintock's analysis prompts readers to critically engage with concepts of identity, power, and representation. By examining how these concepts intersected and were manipulated within the colonial context, the book fosters a deeper understanding of how dominant ideologies shape societies and individuals. Impact on academic discourse and activism. Imperial leather has left a lasting impact on both academic discourse and activism. It continues to shape discussions about colonialism, gender, race, and sexuality in academic circles. Moreover, its exploration of resistance strategies serves as an inspiration for activists seeking to challenge oppressive systems. In summary, Imperial leather Race, Gender, and Sexuality in the Colonial Contest, is a pioneering work that redefines how we approach colonial histories. Through its intersectional lens, emphasis on agency, and critique of dominant narratives, the book invites readers to critically analyze the intersections of identity, power, and resistance. Its relevance to contemporary discussions and its enduring impact on academic and activist spheres underscore its significance as a seminal contribution to critical scholarship.